Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 508, I'm Ceded, I've Stopped Being Theirs. Now, in many ways, we're back to poem 303, The Soul Selects Her Own Society. Do you guys remember when we did this one? Then shuts the door to her divine majority, present no more, unmoved. She notes the chariots pausing at her low gate, unmoved, an emperor be kneeling upon her mat. I've known her from an ample nation, choose one, then close the valves of her attention like stone. At 32 years old, Emily will write this poem that some have declared Emily's Declaration of Independence. It's another poem about choosing. It's another poem about choosing the life of the poet. At least that's one reading of it. Some have said that the reason this poem was called Love's Baptism in 1890 when it was published is because Emily's actually gesturing towards marriage, which obviously never happened. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that as well you've read already and worked with us the preceding 507 poems. We just finished with 507, She Cites a Bird. And if you have, then you know that a number of times already, Emily has been dealing with the question of decision making and the moment in which she decides. Guys, it's a fair question to ask. So there's 1,775 poems in the Johnson edition. That is a lot of writing for Emily. And while she's doing all of this writing, I mean, guys, we only get to read and study it. She's the one doing the creating of these lines. You can't help but wonder that at some point, or a number of some points, she had to have asked herself, why am I doing all of this? I mean, what is the point? But there comes a moment in her life, possibly at the age of 32, that Emily decides. This is one of those poems, a deciding poem. We're back to another comparison poem, the now versus the back then, how things are different. Emily has in many ways struggled with identity, but now she has decided it is time. In many ways, this poem is written to be understood at the beginning of her years of what one scholar has called her flood creativity. In other words, it just started, the dam burst, and you have all of this amazing poetry that she's creating. We're going to reference a number of other poems as we will play this game. For example, do you guys remember poem 250? I shall keep singing. Birds shall pass me on their way to yellower climes, each with a robin's expectation. I, with my red breast and my rhymes, makes us think about the previous poem, doesn't it, of the robin of 507. Late when I take my place in summer, but I shall bring a fuller tune. Vespers are sweeter than Martin's Signor, morning only the seed of noon. And maybe you'll remember 261, where she played the game this way. Put up my lute. What of my music, since the sole ear I cared to charm, passive as granite, laps my music, sobbing well suit as well as psalm. Would but the menon of the desert teach me the strain that vanquished him when he surrendered to the sunrise, maybe then would awaken them. This idea of Mammon in the desert and the way in which her poetry is the only source of life for her. She says it this way. I'm ceded. I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. And they can put it with my dolls, my childhood, and the string of spools I've finished threading too. Baptized before, without the choice, but this time consciously of grace unto supremest name, called to my full, the crescent dropped, essence's whole arc filled up with one small diadem. My second rank too small, the first, crowned, crowing on my father's breast, a half unconscious queen, but this time adequate, erect, with will to choose or to reject, and I choose just a crown. Now it is significant that we end with the diadem and the crown, and obviously we're going to have to talk more about that. Now in the Congregationalism religion, evangelical religion that Emily was raised in, There were two and only really two sacraments. By the way, marriage was not one of them. One was baptism, and the other was the Lord's Supper, as it's often referred to. We get the referencing to baptism here. She says it this way: I'm ceded, as in handed over, as in it's done, as in to concede, right? I'm ceded. I've stopped being theirs. Now, the antecedent to the pronoun theirs is not clear. Are we talking about her parents? Are we talking about the Amherst Country Congregational Church that she was a part of, that she stopped attending at some point in her life? Notice she says, I'm done. The name they dropped upon my face, again the they, maybe the parents, dropped upon my face with water. In other words, she was baptized as a child in the country church. This takes us back to her 324 poem, Some Keep the Sabbath by Going to Church, and she'll say she does otherwise. We studied it already. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. Now, Emily's readers would understand this "it is finished" reference of the John 19:30 passage when Christ is on the cross. Other readers would make immediately the connection to Odysseus, who of course tells Polyphemus in the Odyssey that his name is nobody. And of course the irony is that all the time that Odysseus is away from Ithaca, we've given full lectures on the Odyssey at learnstrong.net if you're interested, is he keeps telling everybody he's nobody. When he finally gets home, nobody will listen to him when he says that he's actually Odysseus and he's back home. Nobody accepts it. His son doesn't, his father doesn't, his wife doesn't, and so on. Notice it's all about her name now, but it's a different name. She says it's finished using now, and they can put it, her name, with my dolls, takes us back to 481. My childhood, I told you about child and childhood. In 71 of her poems, she references it. My childhood and the string of spools, I finished. Notice we're back to the line earlier. I finished threading, dash, to, dash. In other words, I'm not going to play the traditional role that has been expected of me anymore. Now, is this religious or is this something other? I'm going to leave it to you to decide. She does use the word baptized, however. Baptized before, the referencing of the water on the face, baptized before, without the choice. Of course, we go from choice to then two of the choosing. So this is a poem about choosing. But this time, and I think this is one of the key words, consciously, notice, comma, of grace, and she uses the religious term, right? Of grace unto supremest name. Now, what is the supreme name? I think she's talking about being a poet. Called to my full, notice capitalized, the crescent dropped. In other words, we're going to go from a crescent, half, to a full, right? Existence's whole arc filled up, before maybe empty, now filling up, with one small diadem. Now, you'll remember diadem from 466, and we made the observation, so many poems referencing diadem, 216, 232, 270, 312, 283, 299, 356, 397, 427. You'll remember that we mentioned as well in our study of 466, 508, 713, 1075, 1737. All of them reference diadem. The idea here that Emily is taking a new crown. Now, of course, she's playing with a very old game of Revelation 2:10. Be thou faithful unto death, and I shall give thee the crown of life. So this idea of a crown is symbolic of the ultimate meaning of one's life. Notice it's here, unto supremest name, called to my full. The crescent dropped, existence whole art filled up with one small diadem. Now she comes to it. My second rank, right? In other words, this is the second time that I get ranked. Too small the first. I told you guys about her use of the word small, again, in 77 poems, so she repeats it. Too small the first, and then we're to crowned. Crowned, back to poem 356, crowned, and then crowing. Now, in my Emily group, when the young man read this poem for the first time, he went crowned, and then he went crowning, and then he realized, oh, it's not crowning, it's crowing, and I think Emily did it by design, intentionally. Crowing gets used only one time in all of her poetry, and it's here. Crowned, crowing on my father's breast. Some have said father here maybe is God, a reference to deity. I'll leave it to you to decide. A half unconscious queen. I told you queen gets used in 19 poems by Emily. But this time, notice adequate. Consciously goes to adequate. Erect takes us back to poem 419. With will, think of Schopenhauer, don't we, with will. With will to choose. We think of Nietzsche and will to power. With will to choose or to reject. In other words, we are the stories that we tell and retell. We're also the stories we decide to accept or reject, right? And I choose, notice the word just, it's an important word in this poem, just a crown. Now, again, this use of the word crown, we saw it when we did poem 169 in 22 different poems, as we've said already. That word crown gets used just like diadem. Now, this is powerful for us to be reminded of. At poem, you'll remember when we did poem 270, that we were playing around with a similar game. One life of so much consequence, yet I for it would pay my soul's entire income in ceaseless salary. One pearl to me so signal that I would instant dive, although I knew to take it would cost me just a life. The sea is full and I know it. That does not blur my gem. It burns distinct from all the row, intact in diadem. There we are. The life is thick, I know it, yet not so dense a crowd, but monarchs are perceptible far down the dustiest road. When we get to 789, we're going to come back to this poem again. When we get to 789, this is the game that she'll play there. She says, on a column herself, how ample to rely. In tumult or extremity, how good the certainty that lever cannot pry and wedge cannot divide. Conviction that granite base, though none be on our side, suffices for a crowd ourselves and rectitude in that assembly, not far off from furthest spirit, God. And finally, when we get to 528, we're going to play with the same idea again. We'll come back to this. Mine, by the right of the white election. Mine, by the royal sea. By the royal seal. Mine, by the sign in the scarlet prison bars cannot conceal. Mine, here in vision and in veto. Mine, by the grave's repeal. Titled, confirmed, delirious charter. Mine, long as ages steal. It is clear in this poem that Emily is, quote, according to one scholar, being a poet both involves choice and surrender. In other words, great artists are always transcend and include. They're always moving on to the next projects. At 2b, I love the word choice of to choose is used twice and then choice one time. At 3a, all of the poems of Emily, her other poet poems, 261, 270, 788, 789, 528, again, 303, more importantly, the soul selects her own society. Here we get to witness that happening. Finally, to own a poem like this, when was a time that you made the choice to transcend and include? I hope Emily is challenging you and supporting you. Thank you.